Okay, here we go. Solving 9/11. Original articles. Christopher Bollyn. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'm not going to, of course, read the whole book. It's 3, but I'm probably going to read about 100 pages. Close to, which is about a third of the book. It's a pretty thick book too, but it's big print. Let's see here. Let's get my old computer in the picture. Okay, so here's what it says. Oh, that's right. I was going to give my. Let's start out with a disclaimer. Okay, my disclaimer. Okay, basically, because the objective of the book here is to prove that Israel was behind 9/11. Okay, so my disclaimer is, we're not talking about, we're not talking about the average Jew here. We're not talking about like my Jewish dentist or my Jewish doctor, or my Jewish mechanic. I've always liked Jewish people. They're friendly, they're optimistic, talented, intelligent, clean, and so forth. I guess if I want to make a generalization, what I don't like is a liberal, especially like morally liberal. And it's interesting. I was reading a book by this Jewish guy who won the Nobel Prize in neuroscience. I forget his name, and I forget the book, but I know what it's about. He was basically he had discovered the neurology of the memory for this big sea slug, because sea slug has this large neurons that are big enough you could see with the microscope, or even with naked eye or something. I don't know. Anyways, they use that creature to study, and he found that that memory is at least it's reflected in the growth patterns of the neuron in it. But he won a Nobel Prize for this, and he was a very intelligent guy, very interesting guy, and so forth. But one of the things in the book, he gets indignant about the French that didn't like him. The French didn't like him. I guess because he was Jewish, he went over here to do some work in France for something. He didn't get a warm reception. And here's what I'm thinking. There's people who call themselves Jews who are in charge of the New World Order and run things and control the banks, and they try to change people's culture and influence their culture. You got Hollywood with their decadence and so forth. And this guy said, when he was growing up, his parents had hired a maid, and one of the duties of the maid was to have sex with the boy children, to introduce them to the world of sex. And if people growing up in a Christian culture, are going to find that kind of creepy. I mean, I would. It's kind of creepy to have a neighbor who's, has that kind of sexual mores and practice, in normalizing that kind of thing. So you shouldn't expect to be, looked at funny if you're going to be doing that kind of thing. So here we go. All right. This volume is a collection of the most essential and informative articles I've written about terror attacks of 9/11. And I is this, of course, Christopher Bollyn. Christopher Bollyn. Okay. Who was an American citizen, and because he got persecuted for writing this book, he moved to Germany. Starting in September 2001 and written over a period of more than 10 years, This material presents the facts that expose the lies about 9/11 and reveals who is behind the deception that changed the world. Published in a variety of periodicals, the articles are presented in chronological order so that the reader can easily grasp the factual information upon which the hypothesis solving 9/11, the deception that changed the world, is based. The hypothesis of solving 9/11 is that the attacks were an elaborate act of false flag terrorism carried out by Israeli military intelligence with the assistance of highly placed Zionist agents and supporters in the United States, Britain, and Canada. The deceptive terror atrocity was planned years in advance and designed to be blamed on Islamic guerrilla fighters in the Middle East. The strategic purpose of the horrendous spectacle of terror was to radically change public opinion about the Islamic world and to bring the U.S. military and other Western forces into the region on a permanent basis. The deployment of U.S. combat forces in Afghanistan less than 1 month after 9/11 was the realization of the war on terror scenario envisioned and promoted since the late 1970s by the Israeli politician Benjamin Netanyahu and other Zionist extremists. For the administration of President George W. Bush, the drive to wage war in Afghanistan took precedence over the need to investigate what really happened on 9/11. The U.S. military had in fact invaded Afghanistan and overthrown the Taliban regime before the intensely hot fires of boiling iron raging beneath the rubble of the World Trade Center had even been extinguished. It soon became obvious that the U.S. administration was strongly opposed to an open and exhaustive investigation of 9/11. In January 2002, President Bush personally asked Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle to limit the congressional investigation into the events of September 11. Vice President Dick Cheney had made a rare call to Daschle 4 days earlier with the same request. The Vice President expressed the concern that a review of what happened on September 11 would take resources and personnel away from the effort in the war on terrorism, Daschle told reporters. Excuse me. Hope I can read this like a bad sinus infection. In reality, the failure by the Bush administration to investigate 9/11 had nothing to do with the lack of resources or personnel. Bush and Cheney were opposed to a complete investigation because 9/11 was a crime that was not meant to be investigated or solved. A thorough investigation would have exposed the real culprits of the crime and defeated the purpose of the act of false flag terrorism to deceive the public on a massive scale. And by the way, we went over to Afghanistan. One of the purposes was to get this opium so that we have an opioid crisis, so the government can grow in the form of opioid treatment centers. And plus, there was even a Jewish guy on one of his talk shows that had said that that's part of what they're doing. The reason Americans won't rebel is because they're all drugged up. They're all drugged up because the Department of Defense is over there supplying the opium. Back to the book. I became aware the government and media were engaged in a conspiracy to deceive the world about 9/11 shortly after the attacks. The fact that the media avoided any discussion of the very real evidence of Israeli involvement in explosions in the 3 demolished towers indicated that the cover-up was underway and that the political establishment and mainstream media were behind it. My investigation began with the suppressed story of 5 Israeli agents who were arrested in New Jersey on 9/11 after they had been celebrating and filming themselves with the burning towers in the background. I also wrote extensively about the eyewitnesses' reports of explosions in the Twin Towers. The evidence in both cases was compelling and indicated that the government and the media were simply ignoring it because it was true, and they were in the business of selling a lie. Working with the hypothesis that Israeli military intelligence had been involved in the false flag terror attacks and that explosives had been used to demolish the towers, I pursued my investigation and looked more deeply into the events and the people behind them. At every critical point in the 9/11 crime and the cover-up that followed, I found that the people who made the key decisions were all devoted supporters of the Zionist extremists ruling the State of Israel. The consistency of my findings is compelling and indicates that my hypothesis is correct. The hypothesis that 9/11 was a Zionist false flag terror atrocity is not speculative or based on any animosity or prejudice against the State of Israel. It is simply the logical and inescapable conclusion one comes to after absorbing the information contained in this book. This is not just background material. These articles contain the essential facts and discoveries upon which the thesis of Israeli involvement in 9/11 is based. Having written a great deal about various aspects of 9/11 as an investigative reporter, I began writing the book Solving 9/11 in the fall of 2007. Because the hypothesis of my work is based on the factual information contained in these writings, it makes sense for the novice to start with the material in this volume first. By reading the articles in chronological order, one can most easily follow the logical development of the hypothesis from the beginning. This is important because the notion that Israel could have been involved in the terror attacks of 9/11 is very difficult for many people even to consider because it does not fit their worldview. This is especially true for people who have been raised to believe that the sacredness of the Zionist State of Israel. This includes millions of American Christians who have been indoctrinated with the steady diet of pro-Israel news and opinions fed to them by the media and reinforced in their schools and churches. For people who believe that Israel could do no wrong, it would be very difficult to accept the idea that Zionists could be behind such an atrocity. The facts, however, speak for themselves, and the factual information in this book says a great deal about who is really behind 9/11 terrorism. Christopher Bollyn, May 2012. So I'm a Christian Zionist, but I believe everything this guy wrote. I believe that Israel's behind 9/11. Does that mean that that it is the people who did 9/11 are good? No, they're evil, and they have to be smoked out. The thing is, does that mean I don't think that the State of Israel is biblical prophecy? No. So the two things, one thing has nothing to do with the other. Although they are going to be tied in terms of, God's ultimate plan and prophecy and the return of Christ. What I did with this book was I went through and he starts right away. He starts 7 days after 9/11. He's already writing, so this guy's right on top of it. But you see what happens is as he's going, there's going to be some false trails, and there's going to be some stuff that doesn't really turn into, anything. So what I did was I just sort of stuck to the passages of things that actually panned out in the long run. Israeli terrorist suspects captured by FBI, September 18, 2001. While the mainstream media has been quick to convict Osama bin Laden for the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington, what the national press is not reporting is that at least 13 Israeli nationals have been detained by FBI for possible involvement. At least 3 different groups of Israelis, some of whom may have ties to Israel's intelligence agency, the Mossad, were taken into custody after eyewitnesses reported seeing them celebrating in several locations across the river from Lower Manhattan in New Jersey. In 2 cases, the men were reportedly videotaping the initial kamikaze attacks on World Trade Center in New York. Okay, I know I got more. Okay. Profiteers on 9/11. Investigations into an unusually high number of put options, betting that the price of United Airlines, the American Airlines share, would fall, have revealed that Alex Brown, Inc., an investment banking firm, purchased many of these option contracts. Alex Brown Incorporated was, until 1998, managed by the man who is now executive director of the Central Intelligence Agency, A.B. Buzzy Congrad, Congrad, 64, former head of Baltimore-based Alex Brown, America's oldest investment bank, joined the CIA 3 years ago as a counselor to Director of Central Intelligence George Tenet. Congrad switched careers shortly after helping engineer the $2.5 billion merger of Alex Brown and Bankers Trust New York Corp., gaining $71 million in Bankers Trust stocks in the process. So let me read that again. This is too interesting. Okay. Alex Brown Incorporated was until 1998 managed by a man who is now executive director of the CIA. Woo. Okay, let's see here. In 3 days of trading prior to September 11, Morgan Stanley put options spiked dramatically, according to figures provided by Options Clearing Corp of Chicago. During 2 days trading before the attacks, the total number of put options jumped 7,647, compared with the daily average of 2,384. During the month of August, Morgan Stanley shares fell from 48.90 to 42.50. In the aftermath of attacks, likewise, Merrill Lynch put options jumped from volume of 64,000 in 3 days before the attacks in September to 28,000. Almost 29,000 put options were purchased on Merrill Lynch, compared with the daily average of 5,000. During the month of August, Merrill's shares fell from 46.88 to 41.50. Survivors witnessed explosions inside the towers. One of the first firefighters in the stricken second tower, Louis Caccioli, 51, told People magazine September 24th, "I was taking firefighters up in the elevator to the 24th floor to get in position to evacuate workers. On the last trip up, a bomb went off. We think there were bombs set in the building." Kim White, 32, an employee on the 80th floor, also reported hearing an explosion. "All of a sudden, the building shook. Then it started to sway. We didn't know what was going on," she told People. "We got all our people on the floor into the stairwell. At that time, we all thought it was a fire. We got down as far as the 78th floor. Then there was another explosion." German intelligence experts, 9/11 is a Hollywood deception. December 12, 2001. European intelligence experts dismissed the Bush war on terror as deception and revealed real politics behind the bombing in Afghanistan. Berlin and Germany, there were warplanes for Afghanistan were already being discussed in July 2001, and where several of the Arab hijackers lived and studied. Intelligence experts say the terror attacks of September 11 could not have been carried out without the support of a state secret service. Eckert Werthbach, former president of Germany's domestic intelligence service, Verfassungsgericht, told this reporter that the deathly precision and the magnitude of planning behind the attacks would have needed years of planning. Such a sophisticated operation, Werthbach said, would require the fixed frame of a state intelligence organization, something not found in a loose group of terrorists like the one allegedly led by Muhammad Atta. While he studied in Hamburg, many of the people would have been involved in the planning of such an operation, and Werthbach pointed to the absence of leaks as further indication that attacks were state-organized actions. German intelligence expert refutes U.S. version 9/11. January 9th, 2002, a former German intelligence chief refutes the official version of what happened in 9/11, questioning why Congress hasn't called for special inquiry to investigate what really occurred on that terrible day. German newspaper Der Spiegel recently interviewed Andres von Bülow, the former head of the parliamentary commission that oversees German secret services, about the terror attacks of September 11. Von Bülow, who I interviewed in early December, said the provocative Tagesspiegel interview was the first time the German press had asked him about the problems surrounding the attacks. The planning of the attacks was technically and organizationally a master achievement. To hijack 4 huge airplanes within a few minutes and within 1 hour to drive them into their targets with complicated flight maneuvers, said von Bülow. This is unthinkable without years of support in state intelligence services. This led the interviewer to call von Bülow a conspiracy theorist. Yeah, that's the ridicule from those who prefer to follow the official politically correct line, von Bülow responded. Even investigative journalists are fed propaganda and disinformation. Anyone who doubts the official line is called crazy. Despite the controversial content of von Bülow's recent comments, there has been no response in the German press, von Bülow told me. The media has to ask the questions, he said. Ashcroft and Bush, they are the officials who have to answer the questions. Since September 11, public opinion is being forced into a direction that I consider wrong, von Bülow said. I wonder why so many questions have not been asked. Normally, with such a terrible event, various leads and trails appear and are discussed by investigators, the media, and the government. Is there something here or not? Are the explanations plausible? In this case, that is not happening at all. Israel's vast spy network of fake art students, March 20, 2002. Attorney General John Ashcroft's office said the explosive story of an Israeli spy network of bogus art students operating across the United States is an urban myth, but other law enforcement officials say otherwise. The important detail of massive Israel spy ring that operated across the United States employing Israeli intelligence agents posing as art students to gain access to sensitive U.S. government offices, defense companies, and private homes and employees of drug enforcement agency are starting to emerge. What has now become clear is that the agents and modus operandi of the ring were known by highest levels of government and that policies were changed to counter the threat of Israeli surveillance through computer networks. The explosive story of an Israeli spy ring discovered operating in the United States last year in the 61-page DEA task force report that contained the details about the spy ring was first revealed in detail on March 4th by Intelligence Online, a well-respected internet news service based in Paris, France. I.O.'s story elaborated in some respects on earlier findings by Carl Cameron of Fox News, who referenced the Israeli art students as part of his much larger story. Like the Cameron report, the I.O. story was picked up by the leading French daily Le Monde and, in some respects, by the Associated Press, but was quickly dropped. Referring to the reports of the March 15th issue of Forward, one of the oldest and most respected Jewish newspapers in America, commented, despite angry denials by Israel and its American supporters, reports that Israel was conducting spying activities in the United States may have a grain of truth, the Forward has learned. Forward commented smugly that both the French and the Fox reports were dismissed by Israel and its supporters and received limited coverage in the American media. Le Monde and Fox, as well as I.O., suggested the likelihood that those Israeli operatives were spying on Arab terrorist cells operating in the United States and almost certainly had advanced knowledge about the impending 9/11 attacks, a theory that inflamed Israel and its American supporters. The Associated Press was careful not to mention this aspect of the story. A British intelligence and military analysis publication, Jane's Information Group, noted the particular absence of reporting in the American media on the explosive story of a huge network of Israeli spies that made headlines around the world. It is rather strange that U.S. media seems to be ignoring what may well prove to be the most explosive story since September 11 attacks, the alleged breakup of a major Israeli espionage operation in the United States which aimed to infiltrate both the Justice Department departments and which may also have been tracking al-Qaeda terrorists before the aircraft hijacking took place. Reports of Israeli art students calling on DEA employees across the country began as early as January 2000 and continued through June 2001. What is not clear is what the ring of more than 120 agents was up to and why some Israelis linked to the attacks in New York and Washington were allowed to flee or were sent back to Israel after September 11 on visa violations rather than being charged and prosecuted. The art students are reported to be active agents in electronic surveillance units of the Israeli military. The Israelis covered the country and organized teams of 8 to 10 people, with each group having a team leader. The DEA document lists the Israeli military intelligence specialists as Special Forces Intelligence Officer, Demolition Explosive Ordnance Specialist, Bodyguard to Head of Israel Army, Electronic Intercept Operator, Electronic Intercept Operator, and a son of a 2-star Israeli Army general. American intelligence services have become worried by the dominance of Israeli companies in sensitive areas of telecommunication. One Israeli company, Converse Infosys, now called Verint, has provided law enforcement agencies with computer equipment for wiretapping. It is thought that the equipment came with catch gates that allowed Israelis to listen in. Software made by Amdocs, another Israeli outfit, records virtually every call placed through the 25 largest U.S. telephone companies. The relationship of these companies to the detained Israelis is detailed in a 60-page document. Fire engineers refute 9/11 collapse, May 27, 2002. A respected professional magazine read by firefighters and engineers is calling the investigation into the collapse of the World Trade Towers a farce and a sham. Fire Engineering Magazine, the 125-year-old journal of record among America's fire engineers and firefighters, blasted the investigation being conducted by Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, of the collapsed World Trade Center as a half-baked farce. Fire engineering frequently publishes technical studies of major fires and is read in fire departments and schools of fire engineering across the nation. Fire Engineering's editor, William Manning, issued a call to action to America's firefighters and fire engineers in January 2002 issue, asking them to contact their representatives in Congress and officials in Washington to demand a blue ribbon panel to thoroughly investigate the collapse of World Trade Center structures. Manning challenged the theory that the towers collapsed as a result of crashed airliners and the subsequent fuel fires, saying, "Respected members of the fire protection engineering community are beginning to raise red flags, and a resonating theory has emerged. The structural damage from the planes and the explosive ignition of jet fuel in themselves were not enough to bring down the towers. No evidence has been provided to support the theory that the burning jet fuel and secondary fires attacking the questionably fireproof lightweight trusses and load-bearing columns directly caused collapses." Manning wrote, adding that the collapses occurred in alarming short time. Manning visited the site shortly after the collapse, and his photographs appeared in October 2001 issue of Fire Engineering. None of the photos show that the load-bearing central steel support column standing or fallen, which raises the question, what caused the columns to disintegrate? The still from the site must be preserved to allow investigators to determine what caused the collapse, Manning said. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. For more than 3 months, structural steel from the World Trade Center has been and continues to be cut up and sold for scrap. Crucial evidence that could answer many questions about high-rise building design practices and performance under the fire conditions is on the slow boat to China, Manning said, perhaps never to be seen again in America until you buy your next car. Wow. Okay. Zionists who gained from 9/11, June 19, 2002. Who benefited when the World Trade Center towers collapsed? Who controlled access to the complex prior to 9/11? These burning questions continue to be ignored by the mainstream media. Larry Silverstein, leaseholder of the World Trade Center, and Louis Eisenberg, the man who negotiated the lease, are key supporters of Israel who have both held high positions in the largest Israeli fundraising institution in the United States. Silverstein and his Australian-Israeli partner, Frank Lowy, are the real estate developers who obtained 99-year leases on the rental and retail spaces at World Trade Center shortly before the catastrophe of 9/11. Although their leased property is destroyed, the leaseholders themselves stand to gain billions of dollars from insurance. Eisenberg, the former chairman of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, personally arranged the privatization of World Trade Center property and oversaw the negotiations that delivered the leases into the private hands of Silverstein and Lowy. Eisenberg was recently appointed finance chairman of the Republican National Committee. How did these well-known supporters of Israel come to control the property? What actually caused the buildings to collapse? There are two schools of thought. There's the official theory that hijacked planes crashed into the towers and the subsequent fuel fires caused the Twin Towers to fall. The second theory, however, argues that other devices such as explosive charges were used to collapse the towers in a kind of controlled demolition for which the planes provided a useful distraction. There remain significant amounts of eyewitness testimony and evidence to support the theory that explosives contributed to the collapse of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center 7, which fell for no apparent reason late in the afternoon, 9/11. World Trade Center 7 was a 47-story building built by Silverstein on property leased from the Port Authority. There are video recordings and photographs which appear to show explosions occurring at the base of the towers prior to and during the collapses. In a remarkable three-dimensional image published by the German magazine Geo Epoch, which dedicated the December 2001 issue to 9/11, there are 5 or 6 large, deep craters beneath the rubble. At least 4 huge craters are seen where the Twin Towers stood, and one is squarely at the center of World Trade Center 6. Another photograph shows what appears to be a sand-colored blast originating at the base of one of the towers and growing into an immense cloud of dust. If explosive charges were used to collapse the towers, the question of who had access to the buildings prior to 9/11 emerges. Silverstein controlled access to the towers from the end of July when he obtained the 99-year lease. Who Silverstein is and how he obtained these leases for a fraction of their value are questions that have been completely avoided by the mainstream media. Silverstein is the New York City commercial landlord who built World Trade Center 7 in 1987. Silverstein won with Lowy's Westfield America a 99-year right to lease of the World Trade Center from Eisenberg, the former chairman of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, on July 26, 2001. While Silverstein controlled the 10.6 million square foot office space of the World Trade Center complex, Westfield leased the 427,000 square foot retail mall. Silverstein and Eisenberg have both held leadership positions with the United Jewish Appeal, a billion-dollar Zionist charity organization. Silverstein is the former chairman of United Jewish Appeal Federation of Jewish Philanthropies of New York, Incorporated. This is an umbrella organization which raises hundreds of millions of dollars every year for its network of hundreds of members of Zionist agencies in the United States and Israel. Eisenberg, who was instrumental in obtaining the lease for Silverstein, sits on the planning board of UJA, United Jewish Federation. Eisenberg was the key person in negotiating the lease for Silverstein and Westfield, who were not the winners of the final bidding process on the 110-story towers. While the high bid came from Vornado Realty Trust, its path was blocked by demands to pay back taxes. In March 2001, Vornado pulled out after failing to reach a purchase agreement with Eisenberg, which opened the door for Silverstein and Lowy. Lowy obtained the retail lease in April, while it took Silverstein until the end of July to obtain funding for the down payment. One lender, GMAC, Commercial Mortgage Corporation, accused Silverstein of misallocating insurance money paid out after 9/11 attack. In a complaint filed on January 14th in the state Supreme Court in Manhattan, the lender, GMAC, Commercial Mortgage Corp., asserts Silverstein used some insurance money to pay lobbyists in Albany and Washington to try to limit his liability to the victims. Video evidence censored. Some of the essential video footage and photographs that have been kept from the American public and investigators are those made by European media outlets, which clearly point to explosions in the towers. Numerous survivors fleeing from the burning towers have described massive explosions on camera. Such first-hand reports are essential pieces of evidence that cannot be ignored. There's footage from eyewitness interviews in which survivors describe explosions inside the building. Heyman said there has been no mention of any evidence of explosions during the meeting. When asked if NIST would investigate the alleged explosions, Heyman said the Bureau would look at anything that contributed to the collapse of the buildings. On the 8th floor, we were blown back by a huge explosion. A black American in a dust-covered business suit told Denmark's DRTV on 9/11. Another survivor wearing a red shirt told Germany's SAT1 there was a big explosion, creating a lot of panic. After that, we calmed down and got out of the towers. In another SAT1 interview, Tom Canavan tells the German journalist, there was a big explosion, but I managed to get out of the tower. Within seconds, 2 FBI agents stepped in front of the TV camera, asked Canavan to stop the interview, and escorted him away. Several firefighters also reported explosions in the towers. One fireman on camera said he witnessed a heavy-duty explosion. Veteran firefighter Louis Caccioli, 51, told People magazine, I was taking firefighters up the elevator to the 21st floor to get in position to evacuate workers. On the last trip up, a bomb went off. We think there were bombs set in the building. Oddly enough, this writer was criticized in November by the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, a Zionist pressure group, for my article. Eyewitness reports persist of bombs at World Trade Center collapse, in which nothing was mentioned about Jews or Israel other than the fact that one of the World Trade Center architects lives in Israel. Careful analysis of footage from the collapse of the first tower indicates explosive blast occurring 5 to 10 stories below the collapsing section. As if timed detonations brought the tower down in a controlled demolition. These horizontal blasts, like those seen at the base of the towers, have not been explained. An unexplained crater occurred in the center of World Trade Center 6. World Trade 7, which housed offices of the CIA, collapsed mysteriously in the afternoon of September 11th. Fire engineers are baffled about what caused steel beams in World Trade Center 7 to vaporize and the 47-story building to collapse. An amateur video of the second plane hitting the South Tower, shown on Danish TV's 22 Focus on 19th of September 2001, shows a laser beam-like spot moving across the west facade of the tower immediately before the plane crashes into it. The spot, which some experts believe is evidence of a laser guidance system, moves from left to right before the plane strikes the tower slightly lower and to the right of the dot. BBC reported a series of explosions in Twin Towers 11 on 9/11. Firefighters, workers, journalists, and people in the street all reported seeing explosions unrelated to the crash of planes in the upper parts of the towers. But this important evidence has been omitted from Federal Emergency Management Agency report, which was released in April, and upon which the NIST investigation will be based. FEMA's failure to use eyewitness testimony has been severely criticized by the organizations and relatives of the victims. FEMA's director, Joseph Alberg, is a close friend of the president as well. It was during the FEMA-run investigation that most of the physical evidence from the towers was destroyed and recycled. Much of the structural steel was reportedly sent to China and mob-run junkyards, according to New York City police. While eyewitnesses' reports of bombs and explosions in the towers have evidently been censored within the American mass media, there was a flurry of reports from European news sources on September 11th that described major explosions occurring long after the building had been struck by the planes. On September 11th, 8 hours after the towers were hit, the British Broadcasting Corporation interviewed one of the New York-based reporters, Steve Evans, who was in the second tower when it was hit. Evans was asked what he'd seen. It's more what I felt, really, Evans said. I was at the base of the second tower that was hit. There was an explosion. I didn't think it was an explosion, but the base of the building shook. I felt it shake. Then when we were outside, the second explosion happened, and then there was a series of explosions. At this point, the London news anchor cuts Evans off in mid-sentence with a question. Rather than listen to Evans continue to describe a series of explosions that he saw and felt, Evans' voice was turned down. In a minute, however, Evans returns to the series of explosions that he witnessed. We can only wonder at the kind of damage, the kind of human damage which was caused by those explosions, those series of explosions, Evans said. Evans is a professional journalist, and his observations of explosions in the second tower need to be taken into account by anybody looking into the cause of the catastrophe of September 11th. Many eyewitnesses have reported similar explosions, but these reports and what they suggest are intentionally being censored and avoided by the very people who are supposed to be investigating the cause of the collapse. Did a bunker buster missile hit World Trade Center 6? The streaking missile seen in the video could have pierced the heavy masonry that protected the diesel storage tanks. The missile is obviously traveling extremely fast, an estimated 5,000 feet per second, 3,400 miles per hour. The U.S. military has a LOSAT, line-of-sight anti-tank missile that travels that fast with a range of 4 miles that can be guided by laser or global positioning technology. The LOSAT kinetic energy missile uses its velocity rather than explosives to destroy tanks, buildings, and bunkers. No other military is known to have such a missile. In World Trade Center video, the black streaking object traveling an estimated 1,000 feet in the space of 4 frames, each frame taking 1/30 of a second. Although a video might not capture an image of a missile, experts say the rapidly dissipating exhaust of the LOSAT can be captured on film if the lighting, angle, and background conditions are suitable. I asked Matthew Hyman of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the agency investigating structural collapse at the World Trade Center, if the investigation would examine the photographic evidence of a missile and a crater at World Trade Center 6. Yes, Hyman said, but only if evidence of a missile is presented, adding that the 2-year investigation will only study collapses of the towers and World Trade Center 7. Although numerous images of unidentified aircraft missiles are accessible in the public archive of World Trade Center video footage and have been scrutinized frame by frame by internet sleuths, federal investigators and mainstream media the federal investigators and the mainstream media pretend to be completely ignorant of their existence. Spokesmen for the federal agencies engaged in 9/11 investigation all feigned ignorance of the aforementioned video images when contacted by this reporter on July 1st, 2002. When I asked James Margolin, spokesman for the New York City office of the FBI, about the video image of unidentified planes and missiles on September 11, Margolin said, "It's the first I've heard." William Schuman, spokesman for the FAA, said, "I'm not aware of any such videos." When asked about the radar tapes that could have recorded such objects, Schuman said, "We're not saying anything." The 9/11 radar tapes from New York City had been turned over to the FBI, Schuman said. Denial of the existence of these photographs by the federal agencies at the forefront of 9/11 criminal investigation is troubling because it indicates an inability to respond to evidence that has been in the public domain since September 11th. It is incredulous that the FBI, the FAA are denying knowledge of photographic evidence which has been openly published and discussed in the Japanese mass media. A domestic covert operation. The agency's denial of this evidence supports the unconventional theses of political observers such as Lyndon LaRouche, who was interviewed by Jack Stockwell of KTKK-AM, K-Talk in Salt Lake City. As the horror of September 11 unfolded before either tower had collapsed, LaRouche said, "Well, largely this is domestic covert operation, which we had word of beforehand." Shortly after the South Tower collapsed, LaRouche said, "This is obviously a highly planned attack by a very capable agency." LaRouche rejected that the attacks were an Islamic national operation, saying they lacked the capability. Instead, he blamed people who want the U.S. to go to war against the Arab world. "It's a geopolitical provocation," LaRouche said. "It's run by people whose intentions coincide with those of some of the wildest people of the Israeli Defense Forces. People have the ability to play that kind of game inside the United States. Somebody obviously intended to enrage the U.S. into going full force in support of launching of the Israeli Defense Forces against neighboring Arab nations," he said. The next day, LaRouche told listeners of Woody Woodland on New Hampshire's WGIR This is not a terrorist operation. This is a covert strategic special operations, which has characteristic similarities to the militia operation against the Oklahoma City Center some years ago. Woodland asks, are you saying that this might have been some people within our country? LaRouche, in part, it had to be people within our own country. It was primarily a domestic covert special operation by people with very high-grade military special operations backgrounds. It could not have happened otherwise. What caused the World Trade Center 6 crater? July 10th, 2002. Before the smoke had cleared from around the stricken South Tower, a mysterious explosion shot 550 feet into the air above the U.S. Customs House at World Trade Center 6. This unexplained blast at the Customs House has never been investigated or reported in the mainstream media, despite the fact that the horrible events of September 11 occurred in broad daylight and were widely photographed. Significant aspects of the attacks have been completely suppressed by media blackout. A massive explosion witnessed by millions of television viewers on CNN evidently devastated World Trade Center 6, the 8-story U.S. Customs House, although no national newspaper or media outlet has said a word about it. The unexplained blast occurred between the burning North Tower and the 47-story Salomon Brothers building known as World Trade Center 7. Immediately after United Airlines Flight 175 smashed into South Tower at about 9:03 a.m., the explosion at World Trade Center 6 was shown afterwards on CNN because it not broadcast as it happened. There has been some confusion about when it actually occurred. The large amount of smoke seen cascading around the South Tower in the video led some observers to mistake the blast for a dust cloud from subsequent collapse of the tower. Okay. Foreign film firms destroyed critical evidence. August 14, 2002. Why did a foreign company headed by a knight of British Empire manage the controversial cleanup in the rubble, the World Trade Center, and the Pentagon? Although the terror attacks of 9/11 were clearly criminal acts of mass murder, no effort was made to preserve the integrity of the crime scenes, and the essential evidence was disposed of like garbage. The editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, William A. Manning, issued an urgent call to action to America's firefighters at the end of 2001, calling for a forensic investigation, demanding that the still from the site be preserved to allow investigators to determine what caused the collapse. Such destruction of evidence, Manning said, shows the astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation of the largest fire-induced collapse in world history. I have combed through our national standard for fire investigations, FPA 921, but nowhere does one find an exemption allowing the destruction of evidence for buildings of over 10 stories tall, Manning said. Clearly there are burning questions that need answers. Based on the incident's magnitude alone, a full-throttle, fully resourced forensic investigation is imperative. 3 months later, the Science Committee of the House of Representatives reported that the World Trade Center investigation was hampered by the destruction of crucial evidence. The committee report of March 6 says some critical pieces of steel were gone before the first investigator ever reached the site. The investigation Manning called for never happened and never will because the essential evidence is now destroyed. The FEMA-sponsored building performance assessment currently being conducted at the World Trade Center is just that, an assessment, not an investigation. Professor Glenn Corbett of John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City told the Science Committee in March, Corbett had previously called FEMA-led investigation uncoordinated and superficial. You would think we would have the largest fire investigation in world history. You would be wrong, Corbett wrote. We are literally treating the still removed from the site like garbage, not like crucial fire scene evidence. Open letter to 9/11 investigators, August 24th, 2002. The evidence is now compelling. The Twin Towers were blown off their feet. The plane crashes and fires were but secondary distractions to the main event. The towers were literally blasted off their footings at the beginning and during the first phase of the respective collapses. The fact that the towers were seen jumping immediately before the collapse is documented on film by helicopter cameras that witnessed the event. Massive explosions deep in the basements of the World Trade Center towers clearly lifted and dropped the massive structures from their bases 70 feet below the surface. The basement explosions that detach the central support columns from the bedrock and drop the towers left extremely hot pools of molten steel, 1,535 plus degrees Celsius, which persisted for days in the lowest basement, 7-level and clear seismic tracks that have yet to be explained. However, the seismic evidence is quite clear. There were massive and unexplained releases of energy causing 2.1 and 2.3 magnitude earthquakes before any debris even hit the ground. Furthermore, seismologists agree that the falling rubble would only cause minimal seismic disturbances, which is what the seismic record clearly shows it did. For example, the Columbia University Arthur Lerner Lamb's report. So in other words, he's saying that there was massive magnitude earthquakes, and then there was these little disturbances from the falling debris. Both things were recorded. As a matter of fact, the impact of the rubble, we can no longer speak of large pieces, caused only relatively minor seismic shock waves, signatures compared to what rocked the earth, 2.1 and 2.3 earthquakes at the tower's base from the beginning of the collapse until 5 seconds into the 8 and 10-second collapses. The massive seismic wave spike, which occurred about 4 to 5 seconds into the 8-second collapse of the North Tower, was many times larger than the waves that marked the moment of impact when the rubble finally hit the ground. Okay. All right, let me see what the name of this chapter is. 9/11 evidence hidden from the public. Serious questions also abound about what actually struck the Pentagon and why no evidence of a commercial jet was found at the site. I've worked with a number of independent investigators to uncover the most important information about the attacks. One American author, Eric Hofschmidt, has written a book about 9/11, Painful Questions, an analysis of the September 11th attack, which presents compelling evidence the attacks were a scam of immense proportions. He says the explosives were used to take down the towers, World Trade Center 7, and that the Arab terrorists were mere patsies, like Lee Harvey Oswald and assassination of President Kennedy. It is a well-written and illustrated book that contains rare photos of great importance, some of which are certain to be among those the government is trying to hide. The high-quality, large-format photos provide important evidence about what caused the collapse of the World Trade Center and World Trade Center 7 in the Pentagon. The book presents photographic evidence to support the theory that the twin towers of the World Trade Center were brought down using radio-controlled explosives. He says the Emergency Command Center, a hardened bunker on the 23rd floor of the World Trade Center 7, was the actual control center for the attack, and that the two airplanes that hit the towers appear to have been guided by a homing signal from the bunker. WTC-7 was the most unusual building. While the hardened bunker on the 23rd floor had its own air and water supply, it had no accommodation for sleeping, which raised the obvious questions about what kind of emergency it was designed for. The WTC-7 building was subsequently destroyed by controlled demolition that lasted 18 seconds according to seismic data, yet the actual collapse took less than 10 seconds in the late afternoon. The other powerful blasts were to destroy the evidence from the hardened bunker, according to the author. The remarkable photos in Painful Questions show the top 30 floors of the South Tower tipping and falling in one piece, yet solid pieces of the section never hit the ground. How can it be? Painful Questions asks that the tower collapsed floor by floor as quickly as free-falling debris fell through the open air. The video and seismic evidence show that the towers collapsed in 8 to 10 seconds, which is how long a falling object dropped from the top of the tower would take to hit the ground. The resistance of the undamaged base of the tower would have significantly slowed the collapse of the towers. For 110 floors to shatter in about 9 seconds, each floor would have shattered in the blink of an eye. He says there should have been a thump, 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 and as the collapsing rubble impacted the floor below, but the video shows that the floors did not encounter any resistance as they fell. "9/11, the new Pearl Harbor of the Zionist war plan." December 18th, 2002. As a presidential candidate, George W. Bush's inner cabal of Zionist war hawks signed a secret Middle East war plan in the summer of 2000 that recognized that America would need to experience a new Pearl Harbor if the drastic plans to reshape U.S. defense policy to suit Israel's agenda were to succeed. The cabal of world war fanatics, currently advising the White House, secretly planned a transformation of defense policy years ago, calling for war against Iraq and huge increases in military spending. A catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor was seen as necessary to bring about the desired transformation of the U.S. military. The huge increases in U.S. military spending that have occurred since the terror attacks of September 11, 2001 were planned before President George W. Bush was elected by the same men who are pushing the administration's war on terrorism and the invasion and occupation of Iraq. Billions of dollars in additional defense spending are but the first step in the group's long-term plan to transform the U.S. military into a global army enforcing a terroristic and bloody Pax Americana around the world. A neoconservative Washington-based organization knows the Project for a New American Century, PNAC, funded by three foundations closely tied to Persian Gulf oil, weapons, and defense industries, drafted the war plan for U.S. global domination through military power. One of the organization's documents clearly shows that Bush and his most senior cabinet members had already planned an attack on Iraq before he took power in January 2001. The PNAC was founded in the spring of 1997 by well-known Zionist neoconservatives Robert Kagan and William Kristol of the Weekly Standard. PNAC is part of the New Citizenship Project, whose chairman is also William Kristol, and is described as a nonprofit educational organization whose goal is to promote American global leadership. Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Jeb Bush, and Paul Wolfowitz signed a statement of principle of the PNAC on June 3, 1997, along with many other current members of Bush's war cabinet. Wolfowitz was one of the directors of PNAC until he joined the Bush administration. The group's essential demand was for hefty increases in defense spending. We need to increase defense spending significantly if we are to carry out our global responsibilities today to modernize our armed forces for the future. The statement's first principle reads, "The increase in defense spending is to bring about two of the other principles, to challenge regimes hostile to our interests and values, and to accept responsibility for America's unique role in preserving and extending an international order friendly to our security, our prosperity, and our principles." A subsequent PNAC plan entitled Rebuilding America's Defense Strategies, Forces, and Resources for a New Century reveals that the current members of Bush's cabinet had already planned before 2000 presidential elections to take military control of the Gulf region whether Saddam Hussein was in power or not. The 90-page PNAC document from September 2000 says, "The United States has for decades sought to play a more permanent role in Gulf regional security, while the unresolved conflict with Iraq provides the immediate justification. The need for a substantial American force presence in the Gulf transcends the issue of the regime of Saddam Hussein. Even should Saddam pass from the scene, the plan says U.S. military bases in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait will remain. Despite domestic opposition in the Gulf states to the permanent stationing of U.S. troops, Iran, it says, may well prove a large threat to U.S. interests as Iraq has. A new Pearl Harbor, a core mission for the transformed U.S. military is to fight and decisively win multiple simultaneous major theater wars, according to PNAC. The strategic transformation of U.S. military into an imperialistic force of global domination would require a huge increase in defense spending to a minimum level of 3.8% of gross domestic product, adding $15 billion to $20 billion to total defense spending annually. The PNAC plan said the process of transformation, the plan said, is likely to be a long one absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. I asked Christopher Mallitz, assistant director of PNAC, about what was meant by the need for a new Pearl Harbor. They needed more money to up the defense budget for raises, new arms, and future capabilities, Mallitz said. Without some disaster or catastrophic event, neither the politicians nor the military would have approved, he said. The new Pearl Harbor, in the form of a terror attacks of 9/11, provided the necessary catalyst to put the global war plan into effect. Congress quickly allocated $40 billion to the fund, the war on terrorism, shortly after 9/11. A Pentagon spokesman told me that $17.5 billion of that initial allocation went to defense. The U.S. defense budget for 2002, including $14.5 billion supplement, came to $345.7 billion, a nearly 12% increase over 2001 defense budget. Similar significant increases in defense spending are planned for 2003, $365 billion, 2004 to at least $378 billion, in line with the PNAC plan. Total War. Veteran journalist John Pilger recently wrote about one of PNAC's founding members, Richard Pearl. I interviewed Pearl when he was advising Reagan, and when he spoke about Total War, I mistakenly dismissed him as mad, Pilger wrote. He recently used the term again in describing America's war on terror. No stages, he said, this is total war. We are fighting a variety of enemies. There are lots of them out there. All this talk about first we are going to do Afghanistan, then we will do Iraq. This is entirely the wrong way to go about it. If we just let our vision of the world go forth and we embrace it entirely, we don't try to piece together clever diplomacy, but just wage a total war. Our children will sing great songs about us years from now. This is a blueprint for U.S. world domination, a new world order of their making. Tam Dalyell, British parliamentarian and critic of the war policy from the Labour Party, said, these are the thought process of fantastic Americans who want to control the world. This is garbage from think tanks stuffed with chicken hawks, Dalyell said. Men who have never seen the horror of war but are in love with the idea of war. I am appalled that a British Labour Prime Minister should have got into bed with a crew that has this moral standing. Cover-up 9/11 Commission, July 10, 2003. The controlled media and the seriously compromised 9/11 Commission are seemingly complicit in concealing the truth. While writing the history for the worst terror attacks in American history, the truth about the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 is unlikely to emerge from the politically appointed National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States. The integrity of the so-called independent 9/11 Commission is comprised by, among other things, the connections of its staff and the key members to the Globalist Council on Foreign Relations, the White House, and domestic foreign intelligence agencies. The mainstream media has reported that the Commission's investigation has been hampered by the failure of the executive branch agencies, especially the Pentagon and Justice Department, to provide requested documents and testimony. The heads of the Commission recently reported that federal agencies under the President's control were not cooperating quickly or fully. The Commission also complained about the fact that, like Iraq, the U.S. government requires agency minder to be present during the interviews with officials. The Commission's chairman, Thomas H. Keene, the former Republican governor of New Jersey, said the presence of an agency minder amounted to intimidation of the witnesses. The fact that the key members of the staff of the Commission belong to globalist groups and secret societies that have un-American agendas has not been reported in the controlled press. Keene and Vice Chairman Lee H. Hamilton, a former Democratic congressman from Indiana, are both longstanding members of the CFR, as is Commission member Jamie Gorelick and Philip Zelikow, its executive director. Zelikow is also a member of the London-based International Institute for Strategic Studies, an appendage of British intelligence. Members of the CFR, IISS, and Yale Secret Society Skull and Bones are found like threads running through the cloth of 9/11. For example, Peter G. Peterson, chairman of the CFR and Federal Reserve Bank of New York, announced that his Blackstone Group had purchased in October 2000 the mortgage on 7 World Trade Center, the 47-story building built by Larry Silverstein in 1987. Silverstein is the person who obtained 99 units in the Twin Towers shortly before 9/11, who insured the property and its future income against terrorism. He is seeking some $7.2 billion, claiming the tax for 2 separate events. World Trade 77 mysteriously collapsed at 5:25 p.m. on 9/11 in what appears to have been a controlled demolition. John Woolleyhan, a firefighter with Rescue 5 from Staten Island, was near World Trade Center 7 when it collapsed. Woolleyhan told me that he heard many explosions just before the building collapsed, neatly within its perimeter of its foundations. Silverstein received some $441 million in insurance money for WT7, although the cause of the collapse remains officially unexplained. Peterson, co-founder of Blackstone Group with Stephen Schwartzman, a member of the CFR and Skull and Bones, both George W. Bush and his father are also Skull and Bones, is John F. Kerry, Democrat presidential candidate, Commission spokesman Alvin Felsenberg, and Commission member Fred Fielding served on the Bush transition team in 2001. Felsenberg was executive director of the President's Commission on the Federal Appointments Process. War on Terrorism is Bogus. In a recent article entitled "This War on Terrorism is Bogus" in The Guardian, UK, Macher suggests that high-level U.S. officials were complicit in 9/11 attacks and allowed a new Pearl Harbor to occur in order to put into effect a blueprint for the creation of a global Pax Americana. The document was drawn up and signed by the leading architects of the war on terrorism in the Bush administration. The blueprint Mecher refers to is a document entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses, written in September 2000 by a neoconservative think tank, the Project for the New American Center. The PNAC document calls for large increases in defense budget, transform the U.S. military into a global force. The plan calls for a substantial American force presence in the Gulf, among other things, which it says transcends the issue of the regime of Saddam Hussein. The people involved in PNAC and those for whom it was drawn are the leading war hawks of the Bush administration: Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Jeb Bush, and L. Lewis Libby. The project includes key U.S. supporters of extreme right-wing Israeli Likud party, including Lithuanian-born historian and former dean of Yale, Donald Kagan, and his 2 sons, Fred and Robert, William Crystal of the Weekly Standard, and the Orthodox Jewish Rabbi Dov Solomon Zakum, the current comptroller and chief financial officer of the Department of Defense. A political myth. The global war on terrorism, Mecher says, has the hallmarks of a political myth propagated to pave the way for a wholly different agenda. The U.S. goal of world hegemony, built around securing by force command over the oil supplies required to drive the whole project. The conventional explanation that the United States retaliated against Taliban regime and al-Qaeda in Afghanistan because of 9/11 attacks and then extended the war against terrorism to Iraq does not fit all the facts, Mecher wrote. The truth may be a great deal murkier. It is clear the U.S. authorities did little or nothing to preempt the events of 9/11, Mecher wrote, despite the fact that at least 11 countries provided advance warning the U.S. of the 9/11 attacks. Mecher cites the former U.S. federal prosecutor John Loftus, who said, "The information provided by European intelligence services prior to 9/11 was so extensive that it was no longer possible for either the CIA or the FBI to assert a defense of incompetence. Were U.S. air security operations deliberately stood down on September 11th? Mecher asks, if so, why and on whose authority? Mecher lists documented evidence that the FBI and high officials in the Bush administration actually prevented the capture of known terrorists, as whistleblowing FBI agent Robert Wright told ABC News in December 19, 2002. FBI headquarters wanted no arrests. None of this assembled evidence, Mecher wrote, is compatible with the idea of a real determined war on terrorism. The catalog of evidence does, however, fall into place when set against the PNAC blueprint. Mecher says, from this, it seems that the so-called war on terrorism is being used largely as bogus cover for achieving wider U.S. strategic geopolitical objectives. Mitchell's comments are noteworthy because they are the first time a member of British Parliament, Prime Minister Tony Blair's cabinet, has openly questioned the validity of war on terrorism and suggested that high officials in the U.S. government were in some way complicit in 9/11 attacks. Metcher's observations led credence to the conclusions of researchers like Walter E. Davis, Ph.D. at Kent State University, who recently published a paper with 22 points, which he says suggested the most plausible explanation of events, that is, that the Bush administration was complicit in the terrorist attacks. This should be national and international scandal, Davis wrote. What is being discovered will shock many people, which is one of the reasons deliberate corporate media cover-up. The architectural level. If officials of the Bush administration were complicit in the attacks, as Davis and Metcher suggest, there would have been a secret network that connects the planners at the highest level of government. There are a few secret organizations to which key high-level government officials belong. For example, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Order of Skull and Bones, Yale University, President H.W. Bush as a member of both. Among fellow bonesmen, the elder Bush is known as Magog. Several of the highest U.S. officials are members of organizations connected to foreign intelligence agencies such as British-based Royal Institute of International Affairs and the International Institute of Strategic Studies, IISS. Dr. James G. Roach, for example, the civilian secretary of U.S. Air Force and Army, belongs to the IISS. Roach is the man in charge of the U.S. Air Force and its strategic air defense systems on September 11, 2001. The Illuminati. In his booklet 9/11, The Great Illusion, George Humphrey says the Illuminati were behind the terror attacks and have used fear to push forward their New World Order agenda. The events of 9/11 were the classic setup of using a Hegelian principle, Humphrey says, of creating thesis, antithesis, conflict in order to produce a synthesis which results in the desired outcome for the highest level planners. Speaking to the nation on September 7th, President Bush implied that a permanent change in American society has resulted from the terror attacks of 9/11. And for America, Bush said, there will be no going back to the era before September 11, 2001, to false comfort in a dangerous world. The Illuminati have been organized for centuries and have control of our economy, culture, political organizations, Humphrey wrote. They are behind a vast majority of wars and revolutions and are behind the events of September 11. Humphreys, however, does not name the suspected Illuminati culprits. Skull and Bones, already. In 1873, Yale scholars reported that Skull and Bones have obtained control of Yale. Since 1871, the Yale presidency has been almost a fiefdom for the order, according to Sutton. The order is also said to exercise great influence within the CIA. Yale has influenced the CIA more than any other university, giving the CIA the atmosphere of a class reunion. Gaddis Smith, professor of history at Yale, said, and Bonesmen are foremost among the spooks at the agency, according to Smith. President George H.W. Bush, director of Central Intelligence, 76-77, is one of many Bonesmen to have held senior positions at the CIA. The synthesis sought by the establishment is called New World Order, Sutton wrote in 1984. The elder Bush first articulated the need for a New World Order as he waged war against Iraq in 91. In the Hegelian system, conflict is essential, Sutton wrote. This conflict of opposites is essential to bring about change. Today, this process can be identified where change is promoted and conflict management is termed the means to bring about this change. Historically, operations of the order have concentrated on society, how to change society in specific manners towards a specific goal. A New World Order, Sutton wrote in the early 1980s, the activities of the order are directed towards changing our society, changing the world to bring about New World Order, he wrote. This will be planned order with heavily restricted individual freedom, without constitutional protection, without national boundaries or cultural distinction. Whew. There are a few of the Yale graduates and Bonesmen who have played key roles in events of 9/11 or the war on terrorism. George Bush, Dick Cheney, John Ashcroft, Samuel P. Huntington, James Woolley, George Pataki, Joseph Lieberman, Alan Schwartzman. Okay, let me see. Okay, so here's what it is. George Bush, Skull and Bone. Dick Cheney, Yale. John Ashcroft, Attorney General, Yale. Samuel Huntington, Yale, author of Clash of Civilizations, The Remaking of the New World Order, published in the CFR, Journal for Foreign Affairs, 93. James Woolley, Yale, former Director of Central Intelligence and a leading advocate of war and terror. George Pataki, Yale, New York Governor, initiated the privatization of World Trade Center, which was then leased to Larry Silverstein and the Israeli-Australian Frank Lowy. Senator Joseph Lieberman, a Democrat, Connecticut, a graduate of Yale and its law school and a key member of the closed congressional inquiry into 9/11. Stephen Allen Schwartzman, Skull and Bone, CEO and president of the Blackstone Group, which purchased the mortgage on World Trade Center 7, controlled by Larry Silverstein on October 17, 2000. Silverstein's 47-story building, mysterious, that's what about. But on September 11th, 9/11, his building self-demolished at 525. Schwartzman, partner and co-founder of the Blackstone Group, is Peter G. Peterson, chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and Council on Foreign Relations. The Blackstone Group has a strategic alliance with Kissinger-McCarty Associates. Henry Kissinger was Bush's first choice to chair 9/11 investigation. L. Paul Bremer, Yale, senior manager from Kissinger-McCarty Associates and the appointed governor of occupied Iraq. Wow. Senator David L. Boren, Skull and Bones, responsible for George Tenet being director of Central Intelligence. According to Bob Woodward, Yale Book and Snake, after graduating from Yale, Woodward served as a liaison officer for Task Force 157 in the Office of the Naval Intelligence Operation. This ONI task force, using the top-secret SR-1 channel, coordinated communiques between CIA, NSA, DIA, NSC, and the State Department. Woodward reportedly served in this capacity during the Israeli-Arab conflict in '67. Let's see here. Okay, this is out of the chapter, The Lone Gunman. 50 days before 9/11, Silverstein Properties and Lowy's Westfield America secured 99-year leases on World Trade Center. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey turned control of the World Trade Center over to private hands of Silverstein and Lowy on July 24, 2001. Silverstein and Lowy then took control of the 10.6 million square foot complex, which included Twin Towers office buildings and 2 9-story office buildings. Silverstein and the former Israeli commando Lowy then controlled all access to the World Trade Center. Lowy leased the shopping concourse called the Mall at the World Trade Center, which comprised about 427,000 square feet of retail space. 6 weeks before World Trade Center towers were destroyed, the Port Authority completed the process of leasing them for 99 years to Larry Silverstein, the developer who had built 7 World Trade Center, which was demolished at 5:25 p.m. 9/11. Simultaneously, the retail space underneath the complex was leased to Westfield America, the U.S. division of an Australian company that is one of the world's largest operators of shopping malls. Paul Goldberger wrote in New Yorker on May 20, 2002, Silverstein and Westfield were given the right to rebuild the structures if they were destroyed, and Westfield has the right to expand the retail space by 30%, Goldberger wrote. Silverstein is suing for some $7.2 billion insurance money for the loss of the destroyed World Trade Center and his expected earnings for property he has leased with the down payment of $100 million of borrowed funds. Wow. Murdoch and the ADL. Silverstein and Eisenberg have both held senior leadership positions in the United Jewish Appeal, a $1 billion Zionist charity organization. which Murdoch and Lowy generously contribute. In 1997, Henry Kissinger presented Murdoch with UJA's award for Humanitarian of the Year. Silverstein is a former chairman of UJA. This organization raises hundreds of millions of dollars every year for a network of Zionist agencies in the United States and Israel. Eisenberg, who was instrumental in obtaining the lease for Silverstein, is on the planning board of the UJA. Eisenberg, in his role with the Port Authority, was a key person who negotiated 99-year leases for Silverstein and Frank Lowy's Westfield America, who were, in fact, low bidders for the lease on the 110-story towers and retail mall. Okay. Is Israeli intelligence behind terrorism in America? May 28, 2004. But who are these terrorists? Are Israeli intelligence agents planning another terrorist attack in the United States? A recent incident with Israeli intelligence agents occurred on Saturday afternoon, May 8th, when Unicoi County, Tennessee Sheriff Kent Harris spotted a rental truck speeding on former Highway 23, a lightly traveled highway near North Carolina state line. Two young Israeli men in the rented moving truck evaded Harris in a high-speed chase for 3 miles. During the chase, the Israelis threw a bottle containing a mysterious fluid from the truck, an act they later denied. The vial contained an unknown substance, which appeared to be some kind of accelerant because it became warm when it was shaken. According to Harris, the purpose of the mysterious fluid has not been explained. They were driving recklessly at a high rate of speed down an old highway that nobody uses anymore, Harris told independent journalist Dan Hopsicker. I was really concerned because the driver would not stop after I flashed my headlights for nearly 3 miles. He was weaving back and forth, and I was wondering what a large truck was doing on a 2-lane highway instead of the much faster I-26 interstate. They ignored my blue lights for 2.5 miles, and they were traveling 20 miles an hour over posted speed limits, the sheriff said. Asked if it was possible that the Israelis were unaware that they were being pursued, the sheriff said, "Oh no, he had seen me. The siren was going. I could see him in the mirror looking back at me." 2 young Israelis, Samuel Dahan and Amalek Naor, were taken into custody in the wallet of 23-year-old Dahan, an Israeli soldier based in Miami Beach. Police discovered a learn-to-fly in Florida business card. Israeli men serve in the military until age 55. I got a sick feeling when I saw it, Harris told the Associated Press, expressing concern about the proximity of the nearby nuclear fuel service plant. It's the nation's sole provider of fuel for the Navy's nuclear subs, he said. They were just 3 miles from where, if you get off exit 15 off I-26, you're just a half mile from the nuclear plants, he said. There's Nuclear Fuel Services, which is a privately owned company, Studwick, another privately owned company, and they're building a third one now. Excuse me. The Israeli truck tested positive for drugs. Hopsicker reported, while the FBI dismissed the finding as a false positive, Hopsicker wrote, local law enforcement regards the test as highly accurate. Harris contacted the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco, Firearms, Explosives, and other local authorities to investigate the situation. The sheriff's investigation, halted by the involvement of the FBI, revealed that the Israelis had just visited a remote storage facility owned by an unlisted Salvatore Anon of New Jersey, who Hopsicker reported had recently bought the Mars Hill, North Carolina storage company. The truck, according to AP, was rented from a Ryder office in Mars Hill, Newton, Carolina, and was being held in the county garage pending FBI investigation, officials say. The case is full of anomalies, Hopsicker wrote. Samuel Dahan, for example, listed his address in swanky Miami Beach and has more than $12,000 in his personal bank account. That sort of caught my attention, said the sheriff. We're not overreacting, Harris said. We have a responsibility to protect citizens of Unicoi County, and that's what I'm going to do at any cost. I'd rather overreact, if that's what you can call it, and be sorry later. The Learn to Fly in Florida business card belongs to another Israeli named Nissan Gayet. Gayet is an Israeli military veteran, according to Hopsicker, and a freelance flight instructor in the Miami area working out of the Fort Lauderdale Executive Airport. Asked about Dahan and Nahor, Gayet told Hopsicker, "These guys aren't terrorists, they belong to an Israeli military." The two Israeli soldiers, however, were carrying false identification cards. Dahan had a false Florida driver's license, and Nahor had a fake identification card. Dahan was charged with reckless driving, littering, false identification, evading arrest. Nahor was charged with false identification, evading arrest. Police said that the Israelis were being investigated by the FBI. I asked Special Agent Gary Kidder of the Knoxville Field Office about the FBI's role in investigating. Kidder said, "Your premise is all wrong. An FBI investigation was never opened. The case was never turned over to the FBI. The only charges brought against the two Israelis," Kidder said, "were immigration charges. The two were then quickly released from government custody after a judge in Irwin, Tennessee, suspended a 30-day sentence and turned them over to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, a bureau within the Department of Homeland Security. Immigration officials had said Dahan and Nahor would be subject to immediate deportation, yet despite convictions for evading arrest and working illegally on tourist visas, the Israelis were soon released and back at Summit moving van lines in Miami, according to Hopsicker. The spokesman at the Washington Office of Immigration and Customs Enforcement were not able to answer any questions about the status of the two Israelis. And by the way, I thought the Department of Homeland Security at the time was headed by Chertoff or somebody like that. A second team of Israeli military agents posing as movers tried to enter the U.S. Naval submarine base at Kings Bay, Georgia, May 21st, when an inspector of the rented moving truck revealed evidence of explosives. The base home to 8 Trident submarines was shut down for more than 3 hours, according to base spokesman Ed Buczek. When the two Israeli soldiers posing as movers tried to access the base without proper identification, an inspection team was called out to check their rental truck. Dogs trained to detect explosives and drugs hit on something in the cab of the truck, Buczek told me. The evidence of potential explosives led to immediate lockdown of the base, and the St. Mary's Police Department closed off the area around the base and called a bomb squad. Guards closed access to the base and notified Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Naval Criminal Investigation Service, Buczek said. Buczek said the two driving a budget rental truck were working for an Atlanta-based moving company called Advantage Moving and Storage, Norcross, Georgia, was blocking calls from unknown callers. On May 26, like hundreds of other moving companies in the United States, Advantage is probably Israeli-owned and operated. It was a textbook scenario, reaction to an obvious security threat to the base and national security, Buczek said. We saw something wasn't right when the Israeli intruders were turned over to the federal officials. However, their criminal activity was handled with what can only be described as indifference. The fact that Israeli military agents operate moving companies across the United States is a security problem, which apparently does not concern the Department of Homeland Security. Israel's military foreign intelligence agency, Mossad, has a network of transportation and logistics companies that spans the United States. Across the river from the site of the World Trade Center stands a massive 15-story windowless building, the New Jersey headquarters of Moshe's Moving Storage. I interviewed several of the young Israeli men who work at Moshe's and learned that they were recruited in Israel and work in the United States illegally. The war on terror has apparently not affected Moshe's illegal practices or any of the other Israeli-owned moving companies across America. Israeli-owned moving companies have been involved in numerous cases of criminal activities across the country. One notable case was a company based in Weehawken, New Jersey, which was found to be an Israeli intelligence operation with prior knowledge of the terror attacks of September 11, 2001. 5 of his agents were detained in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 after being caught filming and apparently celebrating the terrorist attacks on World Trade Center. After being held and refusing to cooperate with government investigation, the 5 were turned over to immigration authorities and deported to Israel. One of the 5 later spoke on Israeli television, saying movers with the video cameras had been prepared to document the attacks. Like some 60 other Israeli apprehended in the aftermath of 9/11, the 2 young Israeli movers who tried to access Kings Bay Naval Submarine Base, Tamer David Sasson, 24, and David Levy, 23, were simply turned over to federal immigration officers. Although the truck had tested positive for explosives and a thorough criminal investigation should have been conducted, the two were simply turned over to immigration authorities because one of them was carrying an expired passport. The two were reportedly being held for deportation. I spoke with Mark Raimondi, spokesman at the Department of Homeland Security in Washington. Raimondi said that both Sasson and Levy will be deported. Although he did not know their current location or status, Raimondi said ICE had taken custody of the two individuals and simply checked their names against immigration criminal databases. Because nothing was found in the databases, Raimondi said their only crime was that they worked illegally on visitor visas. There was no further investigation of their activities. Perhaps the conspiracy theory has merit, Raimondi said when asked why Israeli agents involved in criminal activities were simply being deported on visa violations. When asked if DHS was concerned about the network of Israeli-owned moving companies in the United States, some with proven ties to Israeli intelligence, Raimondi was unable to answer. He said he was unable to carry on conversation and the agency welcomes any information that could be helpful in the war on terror. Controlled press. Questions about 9/11, September 17, 2004. Both Manhattan events were sponsored by a well-heeled citizen named Jimmy Walter, who has dedicated 1/10 of his net worth to bring attention to yet unanswered questions of 9/11. Walter told me he's spending $250,000 to bring public attention to the official cover-up of 9/11. Walter said that he only realized that something was seriously wrong with the government's version of events after seeing painful questions. A book and video about 9/11, which was like an epiphany, he said. Before that epiphany, Walter said he had believed that 9/11 had been a sin of omission, not commission. I know that explosives have been used, Walter said about the destruction of Twin Towers. Told that the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith had attacked this writer for an article about eyewitnesses' evidence and explosions in towers immediately after 9/11. Walter said, Mossad is up to it in their necks. Walter, 57, described himself as a Bush clone. Son of a millionaire, Walter graduated cum laude from a prestigious prep school and the University of North Carolina. Like Bush, Walter said he served in the Air Force National Guard in Florida and found the regulations that allowed him to skip out the last 2 years. After bouts of cocaine and alcohol abuse, Walter said he found the truth. I want to do something significant, Walter said, and bringing public attention to the unanswered questions about 9/11 is the best way to do that, he said. Walter recently purchased full-page ads in Reader's Digest, Business Week, Incorporated, New Yorker. When 9/11 activist and conference advisor Nicholas Levis tried to steer the second conference away from discussions of the evidence, security guards removed the hysterical Levis from the theater. I was then asked to join the second panel, which discussed the physical evidence with author Webster G. Tarpley and engineer Jeff King. Both Tarpley and King agree that the towers were demolished in a crime that employed both conventional and exotic technologies. That's pretty interesting. Somebody was trying to derail the 9/11 truth there. Okay, let's see. So, okay, as the Mirror also reported, light debris was also found 8 miles away in New Baltimore. A section of engine weighing a ton was located 2,000 yards over a mile from the crash site. This is about Flight 93. Was Flight 93 shot down? September 2004. Okay. Theorists point out a Sidewinder heat-seeking missile attacks the hottest parts of the aircraft, that is the engine. The authorities say that the impact bounced it there, but the few pieces of surviving fuselage, local coroner Wallace Miller told us, were no bigger than a carrier bag. Nearly all the passengers were reduced to charcoal on impact, and the largest piece of human tissue found was a section of spine 8 inches long. Richard Wallace reported from the Wallace Miller said, how were passengers reduced to charcoal on impact? One of the local residents told me that his biggest question, how did 6 bags of mail wind up in Indian Lake a mile from the crash? The wing and engine found more than a mile from the crash site, and a small and the mail found at Indian Lake suggests the plane was shot down, while eyewitness testimony and evidence from the crash site suggests explosives accompanied the crash. So that's about the the crash in Pennsylvania. It seems right. It was shot down, but it wasn't shot down because it was heading for the White House. It was shot down because if it survived, there would be too much evidence against the official 9/11 story. So they tried, they tried to blow it to smithereens, and then they had a fake crash site to lead people away from where the actual debris was. Okay, it was 9/11 Inside Job, September 29, 2004. 3 years ago, in the aftermath of 9/11, I reported that eyewitnesses had seen and heard officially unexplained explosions in the World Trade Center building before and during their collapses. Van Romero, an explosive expert at New Mexico Tech, told the Albuquerque Journal on 9/11, "My opinion is based on the videotapes that after the airplanes hit the World Trade Center, there were some explosive devices inside the buildings that caused the towers to collapse. The collapse was too methodical to be a chance result of airplanes colliding with the structure," Romero said. However, for no apparent reason, the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, ADL, attacked me and a newspaper that published my article for publishing evidence of explosions at the World Trade Center. Why would an organization ostensibly dedicated to defending civil rights of the Jews find fault with an article about explosions at the World Trade Center? 3 months after 9/11, the ADL accused American Free Press of using 9/11 attacks as grist for its mill. Yeah, that is kind of interesting. I know they were doing that. So if you a 9/11 truther, you're automatically something about you is anti-Jewish. I mean, I thought the Jews had nothing to do with it. So I don't know if they're still doing and still attacking people like that, or it was too much of a giveaway. I don't know. Photographs and videos provide evidence that explosives in the towers caused the collapse of the 3 World Trade Center buildings owned or leased by Larry Silverstein. The Twin Towers and World Trade Center 7, which he admitted had been pulled deliberately. Cognitive Dissonance by Walter Chuckyu of 911uncovered.com says, "Is the discomfort felt at a discrepancy between what you already know or believe and new information?" Okay, that's the definition of cognitive dissonance. Discomfort felt at a discrepancy between what you already know and believe and new information. This, Chukwu says, prevents people from accepting evidence that the U.S. government carried out 9/11 attacks. Jim Marrs, author of Inside Job, Unmasking 9/11 Conspiracies, is not affected by cognitive dissonance. Compelling information from numerous sources, Marrs builds the case that 9/11 was an inside job. His work contains an analysis of U.S. military's failure to intercept the 4 hijacked planes, questions the relative groups want President George W. Bush to answer, as well as a draft 9/11 widow Ellen Marani's racketeering influence corrupt organization lawsuit against President Bush and other high government officials. Marrs presents 6 arguments that disprove the official version of a fire-induced gravity collapse and indicate that explosives in the tower cores were snipped the 47 central columns, bringing the towers down. First, the tower cores were obliterated. No gravity collapse scenarios can explain how the massive central box columns with 4-inch thick steel walls were cut. The powerful explosives required to demolish these central support columns would explain the pulverization of concrete and enormous pressure which threw debris and girders hundreds of feet from the towers. The pulverization of concrete cannot be explained in gravity collapse scenarios. More than 100 times the tower's gravitational potential energy would be required to pulverize the concrete. That's an interesting fact. You've got to think about that. See, it was 100 times less energy, according if the collapse scenario, the pancake scenario, was supposed to be believed. There wasn't. That wouldn't provide the energy to pulverize the concrete, plus if a pancake like they want us to believe, the core would remain standing. So everything was wrong about that theory. Okay, anyways, where did that energy come from? Steel beams were ejected 500 feet sideways. The downward forces of gravity collapse cannot account for the energetic lateral ejection of pieces, 9/11 researcher Jim Hoffman wrote. Videos and photographs show explosions in the towers occurring well below the level of collapse. Energetic dust ejections are seen while the top of the south tower is slightly tipping. There is no known source of the dense powder in the clouds of ejected dust, Mars says. The tops of the towers mushroomed into thick dust clouds, much larger than the original volumes of the buildings, without the addition of large sources of pressure beyond the collapse itself. Hoffman says the falling buildings and debris should have occupied about the same volume as the intact building. That is, after all, what was observed when the 47-story WTC-7 collapsed neatly into its basement with absolutely no lateral projections at about 5:20 p.m. That the towers fell at a rate of free fall defies the laws of physics. The cold and undamaged parts of the towers failed to slow the collapses. This indicates that resistance to downward acceleration of the towers had been eliminated. Evidence that the central support columns had been cut prior to the collapse, which I reported in October 2001, can be seen in videos where powerful bursts of dust are seen ejected from towers well below the level of the collapse. At the time, I reported an eyewitness seeing a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the buildings between floors 10 and 15, accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. Even a layman can see that a free-fall scenario based on fires in the building has almost no plausible explanation at this time, Marsh concluded. During a recent Confronting the Evidence conference held in New York City, an individual who worked in the North Tower told me that prior to 9/11, elevator shafts were guarded by security guards while being out of service for weeks and months because explosive charges would have to been placed near the elevator shafts in the tower cores. I am investigating contractors who held access to the towers prior to 9/11. Yeah, that's interesting because people had to be getting in there and putting, deploying the explosives. Okay, let's see here. Until December 15th, the pile of debris was so hot, a piece of paper would ignite on contact with the rubble. Cahill said, "You had workers working on top of a huge incinerator in a rush to get Wall Street going again," Cahill said. "It was really dumb. Only 30% of the firefighters working in the site in October were wearing any protection at all," he said. And so eventually we'll get into seeing, the guys that got sick from the radiation and stuff. Okay. DU missiles at the World Trade Center. Okay, this is, let me see, how long is this? I haven't been going on that long yet, not even 2 hours. But I'm doing this like with a sore throat, Wow. I got a lot more to go. I mean, this is probably going to be one of these, I'm going to have to do this in a series. I'll probably have to do this in a series about 3 or 4 2-hour videos or something. Okay, I'll go to about 2 hours and then I'll put up another video later. We're on page 103 of this book, by the way. It was 340 something. DU missiles at World Trade Center. With no evidence of Boeing 757 hitting the Pentagon available to the public, some 9/11 researchers claim a DU-tipped missile, depleted uranium, launched by an armed UAV like the Global Hawk struck the Pentagon. The Global Hawk followed the missile into the building and was destroyed, leaving behind only its most durable parts, such as the engine parts and parts of its landing gear. Because DU is extremely dense, a wide variety of missiles in the U.S. arsenal are tipped with DU rods to penetrate the armored steel of military vehicles and buildings. Because uranium is a spontaneous pyrophoric material, it ignites in air and generates extremely intense heat when it strikes its target. This is what causes bright flashes seen when a DU missile impacts upon its target. The white flash seen in videos of the two planes striking the Twin Towers is exactly the kind of flash that occurs when a missile with a DU penetrator strikes. If DU penetrator caused the flashes seen on videos of the planes smashing into the towers, where did the uranium rods go? I've located several photos that show a pyrophoric object burning white hot, passing through the initial explosion in the South Tower. This object displays all the characteristics of a burning DU penetrator. The photo of the conflagration that occurred immediately after the crash of the plane into the South Tower shows two fast-moving objects that passed through the tower far ahead of the inferno. One appears as a black dot leaving a trail of white smoke. The second appears as a dark rod burning with a white flame followed by a trail of black smoke. The second object displays the characteristics of burning DU penetrator. I sent large photos of the objects to Marion Folk, a retired chemical physicist from the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, and asked him if this object could be DU. Yes, it is possible, Folk said. Asked about the dark smoke trailing behind the nearly pure white flame, Folk said it could be uranium oxide. Let's assume it's uranium, Folk added. It's burning near the surface and it's pretty hot. It's a small object with great mass and huge momentum behind, Folk said. It's way out ahead of the explosion and nothing stopped it. If the object is DU penetrator, that would explain its intense heat, radiation expert Lorraine Moritz said. The pyrophoric DU would have already been burning before it hit the tower. The burning uranium would have acted to ignite the fuel in the aircraft, causing tremendous explosions seen in both towers. As it passed through the building, some of the penetrator's kinetic energy would have been converted to heat energy. The difference between the orange colors of the flames coming from the explosion in the tower and the white flame of the small dense object are indicative of a huge temperature difference, Moritz said. The white flame coming off the uranium suggests it is burning at its very high temperature, although it is not possible to determine the exact temperature from the photograph, according to Falkenmar. The gap between the burning object and its dark smoke trail is because the vapor coming off of the burning object is very hot as it cools in order to condense to form visible dark-colored uranium oxide, Moritz says. Massive Israeli spy ring uncovered January 3rd, 2005. American intelligence services have become worried by the dominance of Israeli companies in sensitive areas of telecommunication. One Israeli company, Comverse, Infoys, now called Verint, has provided law enforcement agencies with computer equipment for wiretapping. It is thought that the equipment came with catch gates that allowed the Israelis to listen in. Software made by Amdocs, another Israeli outfit, records virtually every call placed through the 25 largest U.S. telephone companies. The relationship of these companies to the detained Israelis is detailed in the 60-page document. Okay. Here's some of the stuff I'm skipping over. Let me just even the stuff I'm skipping over is kind of interesting. Yeah. Okay, he's talking about the Windsor Tower Inferno and how it compares. Why no other towers ever fell. Controlled press hides Chertoff's Israeli roots. Michael Chertoff. Right? Chertoff's family member wrote 9/11 propaganda. These are just some of the stuff I'm skipping. Hidden role of CIA at Popular Mechanics. I'm skipping that too. I'm just trying to get the stuff that really seems like it goes somewhere. I mean, it all goes somewhere, but it's just that what happens is somebody's stuff I'm skipping is that he gets into so much little details that it take too much time to read. With high federal offices being given to wives, sons, and daughters of senior members of the Bush administration, the Hearst Corporation executives that published Popular Mechanics magazine probably didn't worry about the ethical considerations of hiring cousin of Michael Chertoff, the former Assistant Attorney General and new Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, as a senior researcher. But the cover story about 9/11 in March 2005 issue of Popular Mechanics is the fruit of nepotism and Hertz-style yellow journalism. PM's senior researcher, 25-year-old Benjamin Chertoff, authored the propagandist cover story entitled Debunking 9/11 Lies, which seeks to discredit all independent 9/11 research that challenges the official version of the events. Conspiracy theories can't stand up to the hard facts, the cover reads. After an in-depth investigation, PM answers with the truth, so it says, but the article fails to provide any evidence to support his claims and doesn't answer the key question: what caused the collapse of the towers and the 47-story WT7? The lead editorial by James Megis, editor-in-chief of PM, carries the title, "The Lies Are Out There." It continues, as a society, we accept the basic premise that a group of Islamist terrorists hijacked 4 airplanes and turned them into weapons against us. But do we, as a society, accept this basic premise? None of the 19 Islamist terrorists were even found on the passenger list that day. Sadly, Meggs continues, noble search for truth is now being hijacked by a growing army of conspiracy theorists. What Meggs fails to acknowledge is that while the fact that a conspiracy is behind 9/11 attacks is obvious, the question being raised by independent researchers is who was involved in this conspiracy. The Meggs editorial concludes, but those who peddle fantasies that this country encouraged, permitted, or actually carried out the attacks are libeling the truth and discouraging the memories and disgracing the memories of thousands who died on that day. Well, that's ridiculous. Nobody says the United States of America did anything on 9/11, Mr. Meggs. This country, the USA, doesn't do anything. People do. In the case of 9/11, we're dealing with a very small group of people, perhaps no more than a dozen or so at the highest architectural level, and there is no guarantee that they are from any one country. Most likely they are not. The Chertoff article goes on to confront the poisonous claims of the 16 myths spun by extremist 9/11 researchers like myself, with irrefutable facts, mostly provided by individuals in the employ of the U.S. government. But who is Benjamin Chertoff, the senior researcher at Popular Mechanics? Who is behind the article? I learned that he is none other than a cousin of Michael Chertoff, the new Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. This means that Hearst paid Benjamin Chertoff to write an article supporting seriously flawed explanation that is based on a practically non-existent investigation of terror event that directly led to the creation of the massive National Security Department his cousin now heads. This is exactly the kind of journalism one would expect to find in a dictatorship like that of Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Because the manager of the public relations for Popular Mechanics didn't respond to repeated calls, I called Benjamin Chertoff, the magazine's senior researcher, directly. Chertoff said he was the senior researcher of the piece. When I asked if he was related to Michael Chertoff, he said, I don't know. Clearly uncomfortable about discussing the matter further. He told me that all questions about the articles should be put to the publicist, the one who never answers the phone. Benjamin's mother in Pelham, New York, however, was more willing to talk. Asked if Benjamin was related to the Secretary of Homeland Security, Judy said, yes, of course, he's his cousin. Wow. Here's one, the hidden role of CIA in Popular Mechanics. While Chertoff is the czar of DHS, he is not sovereign at PM or Hearst magazines. Its corporate parent, the president of Hearst magazines, one of the world's largest publishers of monthly magazines with 18 U.S. titles and more than 100 international editions, is Kathleen P. Black, a 60-year-old native of Chicago. Black oversees the publication of 175 titles around the world, including Cosmopolitan, Harper's Bazaar, Town & Country, Esquire, Good Housekeeping, Popular Mechanics. Black is the former president, publisher of USA Today. Whoa, you know that's bad news. In 1983, Black was made president of the new newspaper published by Gannett. The following year, she was made publisher and soon became a member of Gannett's board of directors. Despite her efforts, her biography reads, USA Today did not show an operating profit in the 8 years that Black was there. The newspaper's non-profitability notwithstanding, Gannett paid Black $600,000 a year for her efforts. U.S. Today reported he had a circulation of 1.8 million when Black left in 1991. U.S. Today is often given away free of charge. Right, because USA Today is just a liberal propaganda rag that they have to give it away. A piece of junk, stupid. Okay, Black left USA Today and became president and chief executive Nascent Newspaper Association of America, formed on June 1st, 1992. She then became the leading spokesperson and lobbyist for the nation's newspaper industry. Black's position at NAA carried considerable political heft. Paul Farhi of the Washington Post wrote, given that 1,400 members of her organization controlled the nation's editorial pages. In 1995, for an annual salary reportedly to be in excess of $1 million, Black was hired by Hearst Corp to head its magazine division. Named by Fortune magazine as one of the most powerful women in America business, Black sits on boards of Hearst Corporation, Advertising Council, IBM, Coca-Cola. She's also a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. It is often said that USA Today is controlled by the CIA, which, like the paper, is based on McLean, Virginia. Based in McLean, Virginia. The little-known fact that Black is married to Thomas E. Harvey, an obscure lawyer who became a White House fellow in 1977 and served as Special Assistant Director of Central Intelligence, provides substance to these rumors. Black's corporate biography does not even mention her husband. President Jimmy Carter made Harvey a White House fellow in May 1977. In that capacity, Harvey's biography reads, he served as Special Assistant to the Director of CIA. Following that, he held senior appointed positions within the Department of Defense. The DCI at the time was Stanfield Turner, who had replaced George H.W. Bush. Prior to serving the CIA, Harvey worked at the New York law office of Milbank, Tweed, Hadley, and McCloy, the international law firm co-founded by Morris Hadley, a 1916 member of Yale's University Secret Society Skull and Bones, has ties to the CIA and lists William H. Webster, DCI, from 87 to 91 as senior partner. Webster also serves on the Homeland Security Advisor Council. In the 1980s, Harvey served as general counsel and congressional liaison of U.S. Information Agency, the former external propaganda arm of the U.S. government. Harvey also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary, U.S. Navy. 1992, Harvey was personal director for the Bush-Quayle 92 campaign. Calls to the offices of Black and Harvey for the purpose of this article were unanswered. The coup at Popular Mechanics. In the months leading up to Chertoff's article in Popular Mechanics, a brutal takeover occurred at the magazine. In September 2004, Joel Oldham, the magazine's former editor-in-chief, was replaced by James Meggs, who came to PM with a deputy, Jerry Bellinson, from National Geographic Adventure. In October, a new creative director replaced PM's 21-year-old veteran who was given 90 minutes to clear his office. A former senior editor at PM who was forbidden from openly discussing the coup at PM told me that former creative director was abruptly told to leave and given severance pay of 2 weeks' wages for every year spent at PM. Three or four people have been similarly dismissed every month since he said that he was astounded that the coup at PM had not been reported in mainstream media. PM had been a supporter of the U.S. military. The magazine ran a full-page ad in support of the troops in Iraq and Afghanistan in May 2003. Since the purge last September, PM readers have noticed government propaganda has replaced scientific rating. A letter to the editor in the current issue says, I think you guys are just another tool in the government propaganda machine. Well, at least they published it. I guess they did, right? Yeah, jeez. From the day of the attacks, however, agents of the U.S. government have confiscated, withheld, and destroyed crucial evidence and documents of the events in New York and Washington. As the Washington Times reported December 21st, 2001, a security camera shot atop a hotel close to the Pentagon may have captured dramatic footage of the hijacking Boeing 757 airliner as it slammed into the western wall of the Pentagon Hotel employees sat watching the film in shock and horror several times before the FBI confiscated the video as part of its investigations. It may be the only available video of the attack. The Pentagon has told broadcast news reporters that its security cameras did not capture the crash. The Times reported, while this video and other confiscated from nearby gas station are crucial evidence of the attack on the Pentagon, the government has withheld them. Why has the government confiscated and withheld these videos from the official investigation in the public? The withholding of this evidence suggests that they contain evidence that contradicts the official version of the events. There are at least 2 news reports of 9/11 which contradict the official version. Both have been removed from the historical record. The 2 reports from the Associated Press and one from the Albuquerque Journal have been effectively excised from the publicly accessible historiography of 9/11. On Flight 93 in Cleveland. Okay, so all right, we're about 2 hours now. I'm going to, I got to knock off. I'm just too tired. I can't go on. I worked all day and I don't feel very good. Ever since, they've been spraying tons of aluminum in the sky, I get sinus infections and they stay with me all winter. Okay, so that'll be part 1 of Solving 9/11 by Christopher Bollyn. And it looks to me like we're going to have at least 3 more 2-hour sessions, probably, maybe 4. So I'll put this up on YouTube, and hopefully people will be able to get something from it. It's one of these multitasking videos. You don't really need to watch it. You can listen to. All right.